Okay, so we are recording, and then that recording will be posted on the DEIB webpage. And speaking of the webpage, huge shout out to the communications team. You all are amazing and usually posting things before I even like ping you to do so, and so you always have my back. So just huge shout out to the comms team for that. Thank you so much. So welcome to our first speakers of the 23-24 Berkeley IT DEIB speaker series. I'm super appreciative that we have continued support for this series and this education from our leadership. So thank you for that. Before we get into it, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. Some of us are zooming in from a lot of different places and spaces. So let me go ahead, put this in the chat. All right. And so, yeah, we're not all here in Berkeley. So that link is just to help you identify whose land and territory you are occupying. All right. So we recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chichenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities. In addition to our land acknowledgement, I'm also going to share another link. Okay, so this is from the Segurate Land Trust, and that's actually an urban indigenous women-led land trust based right here in the Bay Area. They actually facilitate the return of indigenous land to indigenous people. So support for this land tax is crucial to their work. So I always like to share that after we read the land acknowledgement. And with that, I'm going to actually stop talking and turn it over to our guests and Alyssa Kavner and her team, and actually let them do introductions and kind of get us going from there. So Alyssa, take it away. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Britt. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining and having us here. My name is Alyssa Kavner. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm from Easter Seals, Southern California. Just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what we do so you understand where we're coming from in terms of our conversation today. So our organization's been around for more than 100 years. We provide services and programs that are really tailored to meet the needs of the individuals we support. So it's serving the lifespan of people with disabilities. We have child development services. We have adult day services where individuals are learning to work-related skills, receiving support and direction to interact with others, and make their needs and choices known to explore and engage in activities. We do residential supported and individual living services that helps people live in their own homes and not institutions, as well as more independently in their local communities. We have employment services. So we do one-to-one customized services for people with disabilities interested in entering or re-entering the workforce. And we have autism services, which me and my colleagues are all coming from, and we provide ABA, speech, OT, physical therapy, social skills, and diagnostic services in our homes, in the homes and communities that we serve. So through each of our services, we really try to support full participation and inclusion within the local community. We're really proud of the work we've done to lead the full way to equity, inclusion, and access through life-changing disability and community services. And part of the work we do includes education for other organizations who are also working towards their DEI efforts. So as we discuss DEI today, we want to describe that it must be an inclusive in and of itself. So there's many aspects of diversity that are not visible. So medical, LGBTQIA+, and neurodiversity as examples. And we're hoping today that you folks can also start to refer to accessibility in your DEI efforts. And before we dive into our topic of neurodiversity for today, I just want to review some session logistics. We really want to engage with you all. So we are here to answer your questions. We are here to level set in terms of our knowledge. So please use the chat, use the Q&A feature. Feel free to unmute yourself and engage in conversation with us. And we can't wait to hear from you all and engage in this learning experience together. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my team that's here as well too. I'll kick it off with Ellen McNicoll. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Alyssa. I am Ellen. I am on the training department at Easter Seals. So I work with anybody coming into the organization at varying different position levels. I myself am neurodiverse, so I have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and ADD, which were definitely battles both in school and then in the workforce. So it's nice being on that training department and bringing that knowledge that I had in my experience into this. So please bring questions from your experiences on how that can kind of come into play with your work here too.
Thanks, Ellen. Stephanie, you want to kick it off?
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I am also on the training team and have been working with families and individuals with the autism services in general since 2008. And my experience is being mentored by neurodiverse individuals, including an autistic psychologist, who provided me a lot of new insight and showed me my new interest of taking that perspective when providing services and educating others about neurodiversity.
Thanks, Stephanie. And
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole, and I'm with the assessment team at Easter Seals. I've worked in the field of autism services for over 17 years, and while I'm really well versed in understanding neurodiversity from a clinician's perspective, I've recently been learning to navigate what this means from the parent and partner perspective. My partner was recently diagnosed with, or self-diagnosed with autism, and we can kind of talk a little bit today about the importance of self-diagnosis. And we have 4 incredible daughters, all 4 of whom are also neurodivergent, and it's been really eye-opening and humbling to take what I know as a clinician and apply it to the very individual and unique needs of my daughters. And this process has really unearthed so much internalized ableism from me about understanding how I expect people to show up in relationships, which is very different than how I expect people to show up as, you know, a client professional basis. So it's really just been a unique experience to learn, you know, why it's so important to challenge our assumptions of what autism or any kind of disability really looks like, because it shows up so differently for so many people. And the way to love everybody through it is going to look differently.
thank you, Nicole. So as you can see here, it was really important for us to bring speakers to you that have that lived and learned experiences so we can navigate this conversation. So before we get started, so we're all operating off the same knowledge base, I'd like to first ask you all, what is your understanding of what neurodiversity is? What does that term mean? Again, feel free to use the chat, unmute yourself. You can also say, I'm not sure, this is a new term for me. No wrong answers.
I would say autism and dyslexia are 2, and you've mentioned those already, but dyslexia is, I think, one that is out there as well, that there's different, it's a spectrum disorder. So it can be kind of invisible, or it could be really there in your face. And so those would be the 2 that I would sort of offer.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I think that's right. And I like that you mentioned the spectrum. I think that applies to a lot of the diagnoses that fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. There is a spectrum of functioning. There's a spectrum of supports and resources that are needed, and no two individuals are going to need the exact same supports and resources in the workplace. And I'm just reading through the chat here. Thank you for engaging us. Your brain functions differently than what's deemed normal. I appreciate that. Normal is in quotes. We don't have a definition of normal, but from standardized tests, people of us have an assumption of what normal should be. People's brains work differently, very well put. Differing cognitive abilities and challenges, yes. And also challenges, but also strengths as well too, right? People have different strengths because of their abilities and their differing abilities. Someone who processes information differently from what has been considered the norm, which is so important when we're talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, engaging with supervisees, engaging with colleagues. Distinct from neurotypical or normal, people with brain differences from the statistical norm. There it is. I'm happy you're here to find out. It is a newer term. I thank you for sharing that, Anne-Marie. It was first used in the late 90s. It is something that is newer to our language as well too, as we're navigating autism services. Making choices based on early learnings, maybe from a different place than myself. Yeah, and I think you can see too, like just people's upbringings, right? People are learning differently than other people, and people have experiences that have led them to different ways of engaging. And so oftentimes you'll see cultural diversity fall under the neurodiversity term, the umbrella term. Thank you, Stacy, for sharing. Your youngest was recently diagnosed. It does take a long time to know, and you're just now learning to adapt to that diagnosis. Diverging from neurotypical, everyone's brains work differently. People have different ways of engaging. Wow, thank you so many people you're all right on here. Everyone's engaging in the chat, and I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over as you all continue to put your information in there to our panel. Can you all give us a definition that you use based on your lived and learned experiences?
Yeah, so everybody kind of did a beautiful job of putting that in the chat of like how big of a word this really is, the biggest umbrella that it can hold. But it's that autism, that ADHD, anxiety, auditory processing, Tourette's. There's so many things that can fall under there. We've heard all of these terms maybe once or twice, but there's so many that do fall into it. And just like there's diversity in the way that people look and diversity in animals, and that we have diversity in our brains. Each brain has different components of it that think or process and take in information. And so that diversity in our brain is really what we're talking about here. It doesn't make it bad or good to have one or another. It's just diversity. Something that I know one of the people that we bring into a lot of our neurodiversity talks at Easter Seals, Brian Middleton, he's really amazing to follow. He's got a great Instagram and some trainings online as well too, is we can have a room full of people that identify as neurodiverse and one person that is quote unquote neurotypical. Now that person in that room is the only person that is now neurodiverse compared to all of the neurotypical being these people that have identified as autistic and anxiety and dyslexia, dyscalculia. So it's really a frame of like relative to the population that you're surrounded by. I know, Nicole, you have some kind of thoughts on that too, so I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I think that, historically, there's been a lot of stigma associated with diagnoses around developmental or intellectual disabilities. So a lot of people were never formally diagnosed. I mean, if you think back to when we were all in elementary school, there were just a lot of kids who were labeled as quirky or weird that might now be identified as being autistic. And this certainly applies to my daughter and husband. And I saw the comment from somebody who had their child recently diagnosed at 27. Maybe that was your experience too. And so as we're kind of learning about the different variations in brains and just understanding that this is like Ellen said, it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's just a normal variation, just like any other type of diversity. We can really learn ways of how to support the needs of our neurodiverse friends, family, colleagues, etc., just based on what their individual needs are.
Thanks, Ellen, Nicole. And I'm going to pull some language I've heard you all use before as well, too, is that, it can be a superpower. And so a lot of people may choose not to disclose that they identify as neurodiverse or that they have a specific diagnosis because because of that stigma we're still battling, it can potentially hurt them, or there's a perception that it could hurt them in the workplace. So our goal for you today is to look at things from an inclusive framework that really is just making things accessible to everybody and not to specific people because they have to tell you that they identify as neurodiverse or they have a specific disability. Obviously, in those cases where people feel comfortable and empowered to do so, you will adjust your accommodations, but we would love to share some strategies with you all about how to do that just in general. So now that we all understand what neurodiversity is, and I really want to thank those who have shared their personal experiences as well too. I appreciate you candidly sharing that. We want to engage in this all participant conversation. So if you have a question for us at this moment, please feel free to unmute or chat and tell us what you'd like to know. What can we do to help you better understand how to navigate this as IT, as colleagues, as supervisors, as support for the students of Berkeley? What is burning on your brains and that we can share knowledge on? I'll give it a minute. So many people here. It's really exciting. As those are coming in, I'd like to ask maybe Ellen, how would you suggest that we best support how IT can best support and supervise those on their team?
Yeah, I have chosen to disclose. Obviously, I'm not telling you all for the first time. I told my organization that I was neurodiverse when I entered. And that's because it took me a long time to accept it myself and figure out what strategies worked for me. So depending on who you're interacting with, whether it's a colleague or a student, maybe they haven't figured out those strategies or they're not feeling comfortable yet to disclose that they have a neurodiversity. So finding ways that you can create opportunities to do it ahead of time or present options. We sometimes see in the autistic community, there's some sort of like sensory defensiveness to lights or sounds. So we can come into a setting and kind of just take in, like, does it seem really bright in here? Does it seem really loud in here? When this person that I'm about to meet with is coming in, can I say, hey, does it seem a little loud to you? Because we can move to another room. That now means that they don't have to disclose like, oh, this is really overwhelming, or this is too much for me, I can't focus, because we've offered that ahead of time to make it okay that they can ask for accommodations. And then in just doing that one accommodation, maybe the rest of the meeting, we've already modeled, it's okay, like I will be accommodating. So they might ask for another one later because we've already set that groundwork that we are open to that. Also, just being preemptive of like, hey, not everybody is a reader. Do not send me a 2-page email. I will go to my side and I will cry for a minute and I will figure out a way to get through it. But how can you be like, hey, can I send that in an email follow-up, or do you want to meet for me to talk about that so I can show you it? Some people are more visual, so we just give these options ahead of time of, do you like to have things written out for you, or do you like to have that visual? Again, they don't have to disclose that they need one or the other because you've presented them already with these options. And then that actually helps them in being like, wow, I'm a visual learner, or I'm an auditory learner, or I'm a text learner, because this person has already made and showed me that an organization can present that to me. So doing all of that ahead of time can be really helpful. And then asking for feedback. Hey, how did that go? Did you seem to understand it? Did I need to change something? So we can get more information about additional accommodations that maybe we didn't even think about because we haven't interacted with them yet.
Thanks for sharing that, Ellen. I'm seeing a couple of questions that are coming through, and I know you already talked about some of those strategies. So presenting information in different ways, really just asking individuals, how do you learn? I myself don't identify as neurodiverse, but I do appreciate subtitles and captions on everything. I watch the TV with them on. I like things written out for me. I like to review notes afterwards. And it's something that I had to disclose to my supervisor because it made our conversations a lot easier. So we use a shared notes strategy because I'm able to navigate our conversations a little bit better. So again, those strategies can be helpful for everybody. Everybody learns in different ways. So making sure you're checking in to see what your colleagues and supervisors prefer. Can you all, maybe Nicole, also comment on other strategies? We've talked about some lighting and different accommodations that we can put in place.
Sure. And I think a lot of this really comes down to what has been said already with normalizing neurodiversity in the workplace. And I think that, we all have, it sounds like a great idea, but I think that this is tough because of how our culture has defined expectations of professionalism. So like how to participate in meetings, how to brainstorm, what does time management look like, or the importance of time management, written communication, et cetera. And so a lot of times things come down to a business or like an IT department needing efficiency, right? Like you have to get from A to B in the quickest, most efficient way possible. But that status quo like might not lead to that for some. So finding out what value or what strengths an individual can bring to the workplace. It might not be efficiency, it might be something else, but in general, just having a lot more flexibility about how to meet the expectations required by the business or by the department that you're serving, because just again, those general professional expectations might not be where somebody shines in the workplace. It could be something else. And so when you're kind of focusing on that bottom line, ableism really comes out, and then the employee is not performing, right? They're underperforming because they're maybe not meeting deadlines, when really what it comes down to is needing things written out or needing more flexible deadlines, or, whatever the case may be. So just really looking at normalizing the need for accommodations or the offering of accommodations, just as part of like the natural process of the department. Extended due dates, incorporating job tasks into the interview process instead of just speaking about them, ensuring HR contact information and the process for accommodations are really easy to access or be reviewed briefly during onboarding, things like that. Just really making it so accessible through every single part of the workplace, just so that it's normalized.
Thanks for sharing those, Nicole. I know over at Easter Seals, we're starting to go back in person a lot more, and that can be challenging as well too, and not as accessible for everybody. So to Nicole's point, adding those, allowing people to stand, allowing people to walk around the room during meetings. Those are strategies a lot of people were able to do at home because of these remote meetings, but they can't do it so much when they're in person. We sometimes bring a pile of fidget toys and leave them on the table for people to engage with. It helps them process information a little bit better. I have one in my hand right now that I'm using as I'm engaging in conversation with you all. And Stephanie, I'd love your point of view as well too, having an openly autistic supervisor. What were some strategies he used with you as he engaged with you as his supervisee?
Yeah, my supervisor was very open about things that were most helpful for him. So that would be that if we were deep in a conversation, that eye contact was not possible, that he was more able to take in the information if we were not making direct eye contact, and just made that really clear at the beginning so that the communication that we had was just more clear for the continuation. Also, he openly expressed when he's excited that he'll rock in his chair. And he even mentioned how validating it was that somebody just said, yeah, this conversation is exciting, when we were in the middle of a meeting. So just even validating their own way of expression can be really helpful, and helping them feel included as well, is what he would say.
Thanks for sharing. I like that piece about validating. It makes it feel more inclusive and as if it's accepted as well, invited and accepted as well in the meeting tone. Okay, I'm going to try to dig through some of these that we're getting here. How is neurodiversity diagnosed? Does anybody want to take that one?
Sure, I will. This is Shane, adult ADHD since age 8, and diagnosis is sometimes very simple and straightforward, and sometimes diagnosis takes years and you may never get a correct one.
Thanks for jumping in, Shane. I appreciate that. Thank you for disclosing as well. I think you're absolutely right. There are diagnoses that fall under the term neurodiversity. So those diagnoses would come from a medical professional. And they can be challenging to get, especially if you're from a currently marginalized community as well too. It's harder to get those diagnoses sometimes. So depending on your access to resources and insurance and everything that comes with medical care, it can be difficult to get those diagnoses. And Ellen, I saw you unmute for a little bit. Did you have anything to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, Nicole kind of spoke on it too, is there's self-realization and self-diagnosis that is becoming something that's so much more popular. Like, you don't necessarily have to go to a testing center or a doctor to be like, I am seeing more and more and self-researching that I align with this diagnosis. So I don't have to go into that doctor and have it written on a piece of paper to know that these are the accommodations that I need to be successful based on these searches that I found that the population and the community that I'm a part of are saying work for them. So honoring both those that have been self-diagnosed and those that have been doctor and medical model diagnosed so that we can still support them. I know a big piece in what Sally put in the chat too is like, how do we validate someone that isn't open about it? And it's just being open, like being receptive to what you're seeing in that meeting. Are you noticing them kind of pull away? We talk at Easter Seals a lot about like assent and assent withdrawal. And so what do those behaviors of being engaged and being present look like for the person that's in this meeting with me? And what do some of those I'm drawing back, I'm no longer engaged look like? And so if you are that speaker, can I attend to the fact that somebody is starting to look away and be like, hey, I'm feeling like maybe it's been a little while since we've had a break. Let me give you a break. Or, hey, I noticed that this is happening and I want to make sure that I have it clear. Do you feel like this is better maybe in a visual form or in a text form so that it makes sense to you? So just attending so much to those body reactions that we're seeing and finding ways to offer breaks or supports or changes in how we're presenting information to hopefully open up some communication to make the next part of that meeting, that stretch that continues, to go a little more smoothly.
That's really helpful, Ellen. I like that you're suggesting, just paying attention to the community that you're in your meeting and making sure that you're identifying and accepting of the body language and movements that are going along as you're having your conversations.
And I'd like to piggyback. Oh, sorry, Alyssa.
Go ahead, Nicole.
I just wanted to piggyback too on your comment, Alyssa, about that there can be a lot of barriers to some folks accessing diagnostic services. And I also wanted to bring up that there's a lot of intersectionality between the neurodiverse community and other groups as well. One in particular is the LGBTQIA+ group. There's a very large overlap of autistic folks or just neurodivergent folks in general who also are tied with that group. And there could be, barriers within or fear from accessing the medical community in that way, or having concerns about having like kind of this laundry list of things written on a piece of paper, like Ellen said, and feeling like getting defined by a doctor on all of these different things versus just it being part of like natural self-expression. And so with that, the importance of honoring that self-diagnosis is really, it's important because we want to make sure that everybody is feeling seen where they're at. And, a lot of that can tie in with that choice to either disclose or not disclose their diagnosis, and just knowing that a self-diagnosis is just as valid as a formal one as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Great points. I see another one here that's, sensitive to the needs of the team. This person, Courtney, said they're curious about deadlines and time-sensitive collaborative teamwork. How can we support and accommodate our neurodivergent colleagues who face challenges in those environments?
I think that's a good one too. Like if we're reading body language and we're recognizing patterns of behavior. Wow, I sound like such a behavior analyst. Look at your patterns of behavior here. But like, what are we noticing on a regular basis with these time sensitive and deadline things? Can I talk to that person and say something openly to be supportive, to recognize like, hey, there's a job duty still here. And what can we accommodate for you, because we want you to be successful here. So does that mean that we put reminders on your Outlook for 5 days before so that you can ask for support? Can I provide you more training so that this thing that maybe is a deadline and it keeps coming up and you're passing it, you feel more confident in that? So recognizing the things that lead up to something being late and trying to figure out how can I make some changes before that so that they feel more competent and confident that they can get the support they need to be able to meet that deadline. It's a little bit harder for me to know for sure because I don't know exactly the deadlines and tasks that you have here. So if you could speak to that, maybe we could modify the language that I'm using to be more specific.
I think it was Courtney. If you have any specifics you'd like to share, if anybody on the call has any specifics they'd like to share, feel free to unmute or type in the chat.
I'm just thinking more in general along the lines of portions of projects that need to be finished in order for another colleague to get started. So without having, and I'm not in a managerial role, but without having to make people, self-identify, how can we provide like that environment so that people on the task further down the line have the time that they need as well and the environment that they need as well.
Having one of those moments where the unmute would not unmute. Thanks, Courtney, for having that question. It looks like Stephanie also is in love with this question. I think if we can add some like start to this of like, okay, this is either the first time this person is getting a project or in general, can we put some check-ins before the deadline? So it's not, and for everybody, not just the person that we have maybe some reoccurring deadline barriers with. So anything that we're rolling out, it's not, I'm specifically targeting you as a neurodiverse employee or someone I suspect as being a neurodiverse employee, but hey, everybody, let's do a check-in on where you're at. And then when everybody openly says, this is where I'm at, and it could be a one-on-one meeting, maybe it's a group meeting. I don't know the context of these check-ins based on team structure, being like, hey, it seems like we're a little off from where our deadline would need to be, and this is where we need it to be for this person to take over. How can I support you? Can I take a piece of this? Can I pair you with someone to be able to accomplish that item? Do you feel like there's a barrier in collaborating with someone else so that you can get that done? Really trying to give like all these options of what the barrier could be so that they feel comfortable in communicating, oh yeah, like I just haven't had time, or I don't actually understand what this part means. And maybe from there, that gives us more context on how we can approach deadlines with that individual in the future, because we've opened up a conversation before they even passed the deadline. I had another thought in there, but I can't remember what it was. So I don't know if Nicole or Stephanie, you have any thoughts in dealing with any of your supervisees that have maybe had some deadline barriers.
I really like what you said, Ellen, and the way you said it was that clear communication and just clear questions and getting straight to the point, like not trying to be indirect with what's going on, or, you know, when you're asking those questions, because I think those can be a little bit more confusing and challenging potentially for neurodiverse people. So that could be helpful if we're just as direct as possible with how we approach and ask questions, and how we can offer options of support.
So, as somebody who's a supervisor, I think one of the things that you see when you start to talk about deadlines and so on, it starts to sound like around performance management and so on and so forth. And I think traditionally one of the views around that is, you know, a lot of focus on identifying where are the weaknesses and how do we remediate those and work on those. But I think one of the things you learn as you mature as a supervisor, or hopefully learn, is that what really works actually is being open and engaged so that you can identify your team members' strengths and then actually channel those strengths towards the things that need to be done and place them in the right places and support those strengths and be aware that people have different work styles. And I think folks called out some of this in the chat, right? But like Jay said, some people are great. You can say, do this stuff, and they go and they can keep track of it all and they handle it by themselves. And others really benefit just from that regular check-in to say, well, these are the things I'm working on. Is this the right stuff for me to, and just having that confidence of knowing where they're focusing and so on. So yeah, but I think if you start to focus on what are people's strengths, then everybody has some strengths. So hopefully you're able to succeed that way.
Thank you, Isaac. I see my colleagues smiling as well too, because that's also what we try to do with our clients, is shift. We focus so much on people's deficits and what they aren't doing correctly and how we can support them to remediate those deficits. And we aren't focusing enough on their strengths and what they are doing well and how to expand upon those strengths. And a lot of time by expanding upon those strengths, we can remediate some of those deficits as well too. So well put. Thank you for sharing. Let me see here. I just want to point out some of the comments in here. I know you all can read them, but I really appreciate, you know, just noting things about charisma or people's affect too, just not taking it, not putting too much emphasis on it, as Anne-Marie had said here. People have different social comfort with social norms. So being mindful of that, and that the way you present isn't always how other people would like to engage. So I think the theme that we're getting at is having that open dialogue and that conversation about what is comfortable for you, what is helpful for you, what is supportive for you makes a big difference, especially in the workplace and just relationships that you're building. See other questions here. There's one that anybody wants to shout out, feel free. I like this one from Colette. It's definitely challenging. What should someone do if they need accommodation, but their manager indicates they need an official diagnosis to get accommodations, or they're too afraid to reveal but must in order to get accommodations? Speaks a little bit earlier to that intersectionality as well, and fear of disclosure in the workplace. Anybody have any thoughts on that one from our panel?
I will say I'm a little nervous on this one because I don't know your organization. And so I don't know, like, hey, how you would approach like an HR director about it, or what the relationship is between like supervisor and supervisee. But I can speak to my own personal experience that I did disclose, yes, that I have a neurodiversity, but before I did that at this organization, I started to make accommodations for others in my environment that would have been beneficial to me, and it kind of caught fire, and people were like, oh, that was super helpful. And so by indirectly showing that I could accommodate somebody in a particular way, people started to have their cameras on in meetings, and people started to bold the pieces of information in a really long email that were most salient that they needed to pick out of it. and people started to put closed captioning on and to put in their subject line like action needed. So by me modeling the behaviors that I was looking for, it started to bring in some of the supports that I needed without me directly having to disclose, I need this. I was like, somebody might need this. Maybe I'll start doing it. And other people benefited from it. And so maybe that is something that somebody could do if they didn't go through the organization typical HR route.
I was just going to say to Colette's question that the interactive process at UC Berkeley is really, it does actually require that somebody kind of disclose what kinds of accommodations they're requesting. And there's a lot of good information on, at least there used to be, I don't know, I haven't had to deal with this in a while, but there's pretty good support from the disability management folks in people and culture. And there's a whole kind of structured, what they call the interactive process that is meant to assist employees. Sometimes it's after an injury or something, but other times it can be, you know, I'm coming to work and I have X or Y need. And so there is a process in place. So it worries me to see that, you know, a manager indicates that somebody needs an official diagnosis. That's not a manager-employee conversation. That's a manager-employee conversation with people and culture interactive process folks facilitating it. So that sounds to me like somebody in that managerial role maybe wasn't familiar and needs to go back and take the disability management training that's part of Grow Together, and which is for the consultants, that's something that all of our managers have to take as kind of learning about being a manager at Berkeley, because that kind of thing is really something to watch out for, because it can make people feel really excluded and potentially leave, and then we lose talent. You know, they can litigate and that's not good. And, you know, ultimately we want our staff to feel included and be able to do their jobs. And often it's just some minor accommodations that are needed.
Thank you for sharing and clarifying the process at Berkeley. And it is challenging too, to the question at hand, to disclose or not disclose, you know, as Ellen has talked about. And I'd love to get your perspective, Nicole. You've shared, you know, your partner with his recent self-diagnosis and kind of his struggle with disclosure versus not disclosure. Would you mind sharing that perspective to help this? And a similar question that somebody had about being advised not to get tested for that diagnosis because it could pose legal issues in the future. Is that a concern, or is this misconception?
Yeah, so my husband, his superpower, his autistic superpower is that his brain works like a chessboard where he can see 12 steps ahead of everybody else with every single possible outcome that could happen in a situation. So when he's in a boardroom or a meeting, he can make decisions where he's so far ahead of everybody else that when the deal gets made, people are kind of left going, how did that happen? Like, what just went on? And everyone is like so amazed and surprised and blown away. But if he were to, one of his fears is that if he were to disclose to his colleagues that, hey, I'm autistic, then all of a sudden that like magic and that power would be taken away, because it would be like, oh, he's autistic, his ideas can't possibly be as good. You know, even if it's not such an overt thought, there's such deeply ingrained ableism really in most people that it's likely that those things could be overlooked, or his thoughts could be disregarded, or his decisions could be just kind of cast aside. So there's been a lot of difficulty with that self-disclosure piece, and just wondering if, you know, all of the things that he's able to do because of his autism and the way that his very unique brain works would suddenly no longer be valued because of a perception that, well, he's autistic, so, you know, we don't have to pay much attention to what he's saying. And similarly, with my 12-year-old bonus daughter as well. So she falls into that intersectionality group of LGBTQIA+ and autistic. She identifies as queer, and she is out and proud. She's in 7th grade, does not leave the house without some piece of pride gear on every day. Like, it's a part of her identity that she's very, very proud of. But her autism diagnosis, that piece of her is not something that she is willing to share with other people, because she feels like that will make her excluded from her peers in a way that being queer doesn't. It's, again, she's worried that it'll be like, oh, she's like a special kid, you know, or pushed aside just because of this internalized ableism, whether or not it's founded. There's just culturally such a, you know, deeply ingrained fear and stigma around disability historically that looking at those self-disclosure pieces and how that might affect trickle down and how people are perceived is still, you know, really rampant.
Thank you for sharing, Nicole. And I love that idea of, you know, autistic superpowers and, you know, just owning it. And what more could we ask for? And so the more you can work to create a culture within your team, within the workspace and IT, that is seen as a superpower and it is a benefit to the team, the more people will probably likely self-disclose and share that information, or it's not necessary to self-disclose because it's just accepted and included. But I'd also love to shift the Stephanie, if you can share a little bit about, you know, what are the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace? Why should we be looking for more neurodiverse staff that we work with and, you know, being inclusive in that way?
Yeah, I'd like to start with my the own benefits that I found. So I think I'm much better clinician because I got the opportunity to learn from other people's perspectives and grow from the mentor that I worked with and seeing other perspectives in my own practice at work and supporting these families and individuals I work with to improve their quality of life. But I also just see then in general, right, like for the workplace, we can gain so many other people's perspectives and they could also see things differently than how I see things. Maybe they can find a more minute detail that I'm not very good at finding or seeing. So I think us collaborating and working together, we can go much further in those different ways by working together as a team, a diverse team.
Thank you. Ellen or Nicole, do you have anything to add to the benefits?
I mean, I'm totally biased here, but I feel like there is such a unique thing when you can bring all of that different type of diversity into one place. So every lived experience, whether it's a personal experience that you've had, it's a race experience, it's a LGBTQ plus, it's neurodiversity, all of those things can bring together a unique perspective that can continue to have your company grow and build and connect with more and more people. And like, why wouldn't we want to connect with more people and engage with more people and just bring in all of those spaces for people to feel like they can be heard and find just all of the gold nuggets that you can from every person that's there. So I just, yeah, I'm completely and totally biased. So probably shouldn't be the one that speaks on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that diversity only brings benefits. If you have a group of people all looking at the same problem and every single person sees a solution to that problem differently, you're only going to get improved outcomes from that. And if you have a room full of people who are all taught to see one thing the exact same way, then you're only ever going to get one outcome. So having a variety of different perspectives and brains and lived experiences and thoughts and ideas and those superpowers of how to get to from point A to point B, it's only going to help things grow. You'll find more creativity, more innovation, better solutions when you just have more types of thoughts, perspectives, and ways of looking at things brought into the picture.
Thank you for sharing. I see some comments too about our language of superpower and that it can potentially refer to only part of the spectrum for autistic individuals. I think that's a valid comment as well. It can be something that resonates with some people and something that does not resonate with others. So that's a valid comment. Thank you for pointing that out. Is there any emerging data about neurodiversity being more common than neuronormal? We've had this question a few times. Can you all speak to the prevalence rates of what we're seeing in terms of neurodiversity?
I think Stephanie had actual numbers that she's probably looking for, so I'm going to buy her time. That there's lots of components that happen with this, like increased awareness that we have. So as we see an increase in awareness and more representation, then people start to do this self-diagnosis. People start to go to their doctor and ask questions. So it might seem like there's more, but to truly be able to do a comparison to then and now is very challenging because it wasn't so openly out there and people weren't seeing that, like, oh, what was quote unquote the quirky person now maybe falls into, there's a neurodiversity that we would give them, and or they would self-assign themselves. So it's just, I don't know that it's true. Like, more people, more knowledge, more understanding, the more you kind of create labels, identify with labels, feel more comfortable with labels.
Yeah, I might not have the exact number to that question, but some of the numbers I do have is that in some research that has been collected, there's fewer than 1 in 6 autistic adults are employed full-time. So like you said, superpower doesn't always fit for everyone, right? There's a large number of unemployed neurodiverse individuals out there as well that are still looking for jobs in employment. And also they might have consistently more higher unemployment, such as individuals with Tourette syndrome, which was some research also gathered, or adults with ADHD are 60% more likely to lose their jobs. So those are from a variety of different research, and to show that, yeah, there's a balance between, they have some great qualities, but just valuing everybody from where they're at and finding the strengths in everybody, and then working together for sure as a team and trying to make a workplace is our hope for everybody.
Yeah, and I would argue too that those statistics around employment are due to ableism, right? It's not anything having to do with the fault of the individual or the things that they are not able to do. It's in large part due to a lot of ableism in the workplace. And again, I know that I'm speaking to a segment of the population who has very low support needs, and I absolutely recognize that, and that there is a very large part of the population that has much higher support needs where there might be a lot more barriers to employment. That being said, you can replace the word superpower with strength, which is something that everybody has, and everybody has something to give to others and to their environment, regardless of what kind of support needs they have.
I have one more thing too. My mentor told me about this video. So if you get the chance to watch this video on YouTube, it's called The Restaurant of Mistaken Orders. And it shows you how to value all people, right? So the people that work in this restaurant in Japan all have either dementia or Alzheimer's. And so most of the orders are mistakes, but everybody's laughing and having a good time and finding still value in their time in the restaurant, and giving everybody that opportunity to work in the community, be in the community together. So it's an amazing video. It makes me cry every time.
Thank you for sharing. I saw everybody's eyes look up and probably Googling the video as we speak. I know we're nearing our time, so I wanted to acknowledge a few things in the chat. One, and I know you're asking for resources. We actually put together a resource list, and I do think it will support looking for resources for children as well too. Specifically, we do have an Easter Seals in the Bay Area who can also potentially support your needs. And then just the piece around language, I'm seeing a lot of normals and illusion. What's the actual definition of normal? And I'm glad we're all there in the same space. I think it came from this medical model, and we're looking more at the social model of acceptance and including of all abilities. But can you all speak to how can folks get better at the language, and how can people become allies in the workplace? What are some actions that people can take?
I think one of the first steps for me is kind of already the things that I've spoken on, of just creating opportunities to show that you're willing to provide accommodations without them being asked for. And then if they're asked for, it being something that you're welcoming to. It's not an inconvenience. It's maybe to you, it's like, oh, this is an extra step, but in the long run, you're seeing, well, that can create for this person more success. And to me, in the long run, that's more successful for the whole organization. So just being open to offering those accommodations and then being receptive to the ones that have been asked of you too.
Nicole or Stephanie, anything to add on that?
I'm still circling back to the validation when there's an opportunity for that. Identifying the way that each person learns or wants feedback provided, or how we can provide feedback in a clear, concrete way that makes sense for each individual. And yeah, just continue to provide that support system.
And Nicole, to you, any final thoughts in our last minute as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that Ellen and Stephanie said it really well. I did see some comments about, not fetishizing or tokenizing people with disabilities or who are neurodiverse. And it's really just about just seeing your team as a team, and that everybody has their own unique needs and support needs, and making those just readily available and accessible to everybody.
Well, I so appreciate you all candidly sharing your stories and your experiences. Thank you to Berkeley's IT team for being so engaging. There's so many of you here. The chat was way more exciting than I had expected it to be. And for those of you that felt comfortable sharing your own personal stories, as well as your unmuting and letting us hear your voice. I personally know I learn something every time I engage with these three ladies, and simple things that can be done, asking the team about preferences for lighting, offering more breaks, offering wiggle room, offering preferences of chairs, lots of choices throughout my workday as I'm engaging with people will be something that I continue to work on as well too. So we really are grateful that you had us here for this conversation. We will be on for about 15 more minutes if anybody else wants to stay on and engage in conversation with us. But I will kick it back over to you, Britt.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, so much. We had like 140 people. That's the most people we've ever had at one of these speaker series. So I guess that means that we need to do this more. We need to have this conversation more. And so I just am so appreciative of all of you for coming, adding things in the chat. It also gives me something to think about and initiatives to build on for you all. So I'm thrilled with that. And again, yeah, these folks are going to stay on for about 15 more minutes. So if you have questions that you want to ask, please stay, ask them. If not, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
And as people are jumping off, Britt, we did, and Stephanie, I'll highlight her, did create a one-pager resource. So we'll send that over to you so you can disseminate to your teams, just resources that exist up in the Bay Area for you all, and some language, etc.
Awesome. I'm also going to stop recording because if folks have questions for you, I don't want to record those. So I will stop recording. If you're going to stick around and ask a question, feel free to do so.